There's this image a lot of us have in our heads, the successful person. You know the one. They wake up at 4:47 a.m., not 4:48, because every minute counts. They've got a cold plunge in their garage. They're answering emails before the sun even bothers to show up. They're grinding, hustling, sacrificing, pushing through, and somewhere in all that noise, supposedly, wealth is being built. And if you're not doing all of that, well, maybe you just don't want it bad enough. I used to believe that. Honestly, I think a lot of us do at some point. You see someone successful and you assume the path to what they have is paved with suffering. More hours, less sleep, fewer dinners with people you love. And so you try it. You push harder. You say yes to everything. You tell yourself not yet. Not yet to the vacation. Not yet to slowing down. Not yet to actually enjoying any of the money you're supposedly building toward. And then one day you look up and realize you're exhausted. Your relationships feel thin, you haven't read a book for fun in 3 years, and your bank account, honestly, it's not even that much better than it was when you started grinding. What happened? My name is Emmy, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, the psychology behind it, and why some people seem to build real, lasting wealth almost quietly, without the 4 a.m. wake-ups and the hustle culture bumper stickers, while other people grind themselves into the ground and end up with very little to show for it except a deep, bone-tired fatigue that follows them everywhere. And what I've found after going deep into this stuff is that the grinding model, the one we've all been sold, is not only unsustainable, it's often actively working against you. There's a completely different way to think about building wealth, one that doesn't require you to sacrifice your health, your relationships, or the actual experience of being alive. And I want to walk you through it today, because I think it genuinely might change the way you see all of this. So let's start at the beginning. Let's start with the story we've been told. The hustle narrative didn't come from nowhere. It has roots in real things, in the immigrant experience, in survival, in the genuinely difficult reality that some people have to work incredibly hard just to meet their basic needs. That's real, and it matters. But somewhere along the way, the culture took that story, the story of necessity, and turned it into an identity, into a personality trait, into something aspirational. Suddenly, being busy became a status symbol. How are you? Busy, said with a little exhaustion, a little pride. Being overworked started to signal that you were important, that you mattered, that things couldn't function without you. And social media poured gasoline on all of it, because now you could perform your hustle in real time. You could post the 6 a.m. gym selfie, the late-night office shot, the no days off caption, and get rewarded for it with likes and comments that said, essentially, yes, you are doing it right. The problem is that hustle by itself is not a wealth strategy. It's an activity. And there's a huge difference between activity and progress. You can be wildly busy and completely broke. In fact, a lot of people are. They're working multiple jobs, saying yes to every opportunity, filling every hour, and still living paycheck to paycheck, because the actual mechanics of wealth building are nowhere in the picture. Think about it this way. Imagine two people. One is a freelancer who works 70 hours a week, takes every client who calls, never raises their rates, spends every dollar they earn, and is constantly exhausted but tells themselves they're building something. The other person works 40 hours a week at a job they're reasonably good at, spends less than they earn, invests consistently every single month, and uses their free time to rest, think, learn, and show up for the people in their life. 10 years from now, who has more wealth? Almost certainly the second person, not because they worked harder, because they worked smarter, and they didn't confuse motion with momentum. This is the first thing worth really sitting with. Hustle is not the same as leverage, and leverage, finding ways to make your money, your skills, and your time work in ways that don't require you to be physically present and grinding every second, that's actually what wealth is built on. Now let's talk about something that nobody really wants to say out loud, which is this. The reason a lot of people grind isn't actually because they've calculated it's the optimal path to wealth. It's because they're scared, and grinding feels like doing something about the fear. When you're anxious about money, and a lot of us are, often for very understandable reasons, being busy feels safe. It feels like you're taking action. Every extra hour worked, every extra dollar earned feels like a buffer between you and whatever financial disaster you're afraid of. And that feeling is real. I understand it completely. But here's what happens. When you're operating from fear, you make short-term decisions. You take the project you don't really want because you're afraid to say no. You don't negotiate your salary because you're afraid they'll take the offer away. You don't invest because the market feels scary and what if you lose it? You don't ask for the raise. You don't launch the thing. You stay in motion, but you stay small because fear keeps your horizon very, very close. Real wealth requires a longer horizon. It requires being able to look 5, 10, 20 years out and make decisions today based on what that future version of you will thank you for. And that kind of thinking is genuinely hard to do when you're exhausted and running on cortisol and haven't slept properly in weeks. There's actual science behind this, by the way. Chronic stress, the kind that comes with relentless overwork, impairs the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain responsible for long-term planning, impulse control, and decision-making. In other words, grinding too hard literally makes you worse at the thinking that builds wealth. You end up working more and thinking less clearly. It's almost cruel when you think about it. So, one of the most genuinely productive things you can do for your financial future is protect your cognitive capacity. Sleep, rest, Sabbath, if that word resonates with you, the ancient, deeply human idea that there is a time to stop, to recover, to let things settle. These aren't luxuries, they are inputs into your ability to think clearly, see opportunities, and make good decisions, which are ultimately the things that build wealth. Let's get into the actual mechanics for a bit, because I don't want this to just be philosophical, I want it to be useful. The foundational truth of wealth building, and I know this sounds almost embarrassingly simple, is that wealth is what you keep, not what you earn. And more specifically, it's the gap between what you earn and what you spend, redirected consistently into assets that grow. That's it. That's basically the whole thing. And the reason people miss it is not because it's complicated, it's because it's quiet. It doesn't look impressive. It doesn't make a great Instagram caption. There's no "I stayed up until 2 a.m. building my investment portfolio" story that goes viral. It's just month after month putting money away into indexed funds or real estate or a retirement account, and then leaving it alone and letting compound interest do its quiet, miraculous work. Let me give you a real sense of what that actually looks like. If you invest $500 a month starting at 25 at an average return of 7%, you'll have roughly $1.3 million by the time you're 65. If you wait until 35 to start, investing the same amount with the same return, you end up with about $600,000. Starting 10 years earlier, without earning more money, without working harder, nearly doubles the outcome. That's the power of time and consistency, and it doesn't require grinding. It requires showing up month after month with a reasonable amount of discipline. The grinding model says earn more by working more. The wealth building model says earn enough, spend less than that, and invest the difference consistently over a long time. One of those requires you to sacrifice your life. The other one actually works. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Emmy, that's great, but I'm not earning enough to invest $500 a month. And that might be genuinely true, and it's worth addressing directly, because I don't want to gloss over the very real ways that economic circumstances vary. If you're truly in survival mode right now, the immediate priority is getting to stable ground, which might mean that extra work, that second job is temporarily necessary. I'm not dismissing that reality. But for a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot, the issue isn't actually that income is too low, it's that spending has expanded to fill the income available. Lifestyle inflation. You get a raise, so the apartment gets nicer, the car gets newer, the dinners out get more frequent, and the gap between income and spending, the wealth-building gap, stays roughly zero. The question worth asking yourself, honestly and without judgment, is if you had to live on 80% of your current income, could you? If the answer is yes, even a reluctant yes, then the math is actually already there. The gap is possible, it's just being filled with things that aren't building your future. Okay, so we've talked about the mindset shift and the basic mechanics. Let's talk about something that I think is underrated in these conversations, which is the role of boring consistency and what actually makes it possible. Here's a thing I've noticed. A lot of people approach personal finance the same way they approach a diet, with enormous initial enthusiasm, a complete overhaul, and a rigid plan that requires perfect execution. And then life happens. There's a wedding, there's a car repair, there's a hard month emotionally, and the plan cracks, and because it was all or nothing, the whole thing falls apart and you go back to zero. Real wealth building is not a diet. It's more like a lifestyle. It doesn't require perfection. It requires a system that mostly works most of the time and has enough flexibility that it doesn't break completely when things get hard, which they will because that's just life. The practical version of this looks like automation. You set up your investments to happen automatically on payday. You don't have to decide every month whether to invest because the decision has already been made and the system handles it. You don't have to have willpower at 11 p.m. after a hard day because the money is already gone into the right place before you ever have a chance to spend it. This sounds small, but it is genuinely one of the most powerful changes you can make because it removes the grind from the equation. You don't have to hustle and sacrifice and white-knuckle your way through every paycheck. The system just works, quietly in the background while you live your life. And then you can focus your actual energy, your creative energy, your relationship energy, your mental and physical health on things that actually matter. On getting better at your craft, which will naturally increase your income over time, on the relationships that support your mental health, which supports your decision-making, which supports your financial outcomes, on rest and recovery, which make you sharper and more effective when you are working. It's all connected. I want to talk about the income side of this for a minute, because I don't want to give the impression that it's all just spending less and investing, because income genuinely matters, and there are ways to grow it that don't require trading every waking hour for money. The most powerful income growth strategy that doesn't require working more hours is developing rare, valuable skills and pricing them correctly. This sounds obvious when you say it, but it's amazing how many people are significantly underpriced for what they actually do, and they don't raise their prices because they're afraid or because they don't fully believe in the value of what they offer. Negotiation is one of the highest return activities you can do with 1 hour of your life. Studies suggest that people who negotiate their salary at the start of a new job earn significantly more over the course of their careers, not because they worked more, but because they asked, and then they continued to ask for raises. And because salaries compound over time, future raises are percentages of what you already earn. The people who negotiated are quietly building financial gaps that the non-negotiators never close. Developing a skill that's in demand, whether that's coding, writing, sales, design, public speaking, data analysis, project management, and then becoming genuinely excellent at it, is a way to increase your income capacity without simply adding more hours. One person who is truly great at something can often earn in 20 hours what it takes someone mediocre 40 hours to earn. That extra 20 hours, that's your life. That's the gym, the dinner with your partner, the sleep, the long walk. There's also the question of what people call income streams, which can become very hustle-coded very fast, with everyone telling you to build your side hustle empire. I want to be careful here. Not everyone needs to have 4 side hustles, and spreading yourself thin across a dozen income sources can actually reduce the quality of your main work, which is usually your primary asset. But there's something worth saying about the value of eventually having income that doesn't require your time at a 1-to-1 ratio. A rental property, dividends from investments, a course you built once that sells on its own, a book, content that generates ad revenue over time. These aren't get-rich-quick things. They take real investment of time and money to build. But the eventual payoff is income that doesn't require you to grind forever. The question isn't, how do I add more income sources right now? The question is, what could I build or create that would work while I'm not working? And then working toward that patiently, not desperately. Let me say something that might be a little uncomfortable, which is that a lot of the grinding we do is social. It's comparative. It's not actually about building wealth. It's about not feeling left behind, about keeping up, about being able to say you're doing something when someone asks. We lived in a culture that has made financial comparison almost impossible to avoid. You see the highlight reel of everyone's life, the vacations, the house renovations, the cars, and it's almost impossible to not feel a low-level anxiety that everyone else is doing better than you. And the response to that anxiety is often to work more, spend more to signal success, and then work even more to cover the spending. It's an exhausting loop. The research on this is pretty clear. Comparative spending, buying things not because they bring you genuine joy, but because they signal status, is one of the most reliable wealth destroyers. It's not the lattes. It's the car that's slightly nicer than you need because your neighbor just got one. It's the kitchen renovation that was genuinely fine before, but started to look modest compared to what you saw at your friend's house. It's the continuous upward pressure of trying to feel like you're doing well by the standards of people around you. The people who build real wealth almost always have a quiet sense of their own scoreboard. They've defined what enough looks like for them, what they actually need to feel secure, comfortable, and free. And they're not really playing the comparison game, which means they can keep the gap wide, spend what genuinely adds value to their lives, invest the rest, and feel okay about that. This is not about being cheap or joyless, it's about being intentional. There's a profound difference between spending money on something because you really want it and it genuinely improves your experience of being alive, and spending money on something because you're anxious about how you look to other people. One of those is a fine use of money. The other one is a slow leak in your wealth-building bucket. I want to come back to something I said near the beginning, which is this idea of the relationship between rest and wealth, because I don't think it can be overstated. There's a concept in productivity and performance circles called deliberate practice, the idea that quality of practice matters far more than quantity. Elite performers in almost every field don't just practice more than everyone else, they practice more intentionally, with full focus and attention, and then they rest, they recover, they let the learning integrate, and then they go again. The same principle applies to your financial and professional life. A few hours of focused, clear-headed thinking about your career, your finances, your skills, your opportunities, done in a state of rest and mental clarity, can produce better results than weeks of exhausted grinding. But you have to be rested enough to think clearly. You have to have the space in your life to see the big picture. One of my favorite things to do, and I know this sounds almost quaint, is to take a slow morning, make coffee, sit down without my phone, and just think about my financial situation with a clear head. Not frantically, not anxiously, just calmly looking at where things are, where I want them to go, what's working, what's not. This kind of quiet, intentional reflection is something that grinding culture has no room for, but I'd argue it's more valuable than most of the grinding. Because the question isn't just, how do I earn more income? It's, am I moving in a direction that leads somewhere I actually want to go? And you can't answer that question when you're running so fast you can't see where you are. Here's something worth saying toward the end of all of this. The reason we talk about money as if it's just a numbers game is because numbers are concrete and feelings are messy. It's easier to talk about investment returns and savings rates than it is to talk about the fear underneath the grinding, the identity wrapped up in being busy, the grief of realizing you've been chasing a version of success that doesn't actually make you happy. But wealth, real wealth, the kind that gives you freedom and security and time, is deeply personal. It's connected to your values, your fears, your relationships, your history with money, and building it in a sustainable way requires doing some of that inner work alongside the practical stuff. Asking yourself what you actually want, not what you've been told to want. Understanding what money means to you emotionally, not just mathematically. Figuring out what enough looks like specifically for your life, not for some hypothetical version of success you absorbed from the culture. Because without that clarity, you'll keep moving the finish line. You'll hit one income target and immediately feel like you need the next one. You'll save to a number and then decide that number isn't enough. You'll grind and grind and grind without ever arriving because you're not actually sure what you're trying to arrive at. So let's bring all of this together. The core thing I want you to walk away with is this. The grinding model doesn't just cost you your life, it often doesn't even build the wealth it promises. Because grinding without strategy is just effort without direction. Because exhaustion impairs the thinking that actually produces wealth. Because consistently working more hours doesn't compound the way consistently investing money does. Because the best decisions about your career, your finances, your opportunities come from clarity, not from panic. The real path looks quieter, honestly. It looks like spending less than you earn, consistently, without drama, investing the difference automatically month after month in assets that grow over time, developing genuinely valuable skills and pricing them honestly, protecting your time and your energy as fiercely as you'd protect any other valuable resource, resting enough to think clearly, building systems that work while you're not grinding, staying off the comparison treadmill, and defining wealth by your own terms, not everyone else's. Because here's the thing nobody really says. The healthiest and happiest people tend to make better financial decisions over time. They have longer time horizons. They take better care of their bodies, which reduces medical expenses down the road. They have stronger relationships, which provides support during hard times. They have the mental space to see opportunities and the clarity to act on them well. Your life isn't the cost of building wealth, it's actually part of the foundation. So if you're grinding right now, if you're running on fumes and telling yourself it'll all be worth it someday, I'm not here to judge you for it. I genuinely understand the impulse. But I want to gently ask you, is it working? Not in the short-term, moment-to-moment sense, but really, actually working. Is the gap between what you earn and what you keep growing? Are you building something that will exist without you running it? Are you clear on where you're going? And if the honest answer is not really, that's okay. That's information. That's the beginning of a different approach. You don't have to grind your way to wealth. You just have to be consistent, patient, clear-headed, and a little bit strategic. And you have to let yourself actually live while you do it. Because the whole point of building wealth, the whole actual point, is so that your life can be better. And it's worth remembering that your life is already happening right now, whether you're grinding or not. Might as well show up for it. If this gave you something useful to think about, I'd love for you to share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to go deeper on any of this, the psychology, the strategy, the real mechanics of building wealth without losing your mind, there's a lot more where this came from.